Okay, thank you so much for everybody for joining in Barry's absence. So this week was Yom Yerushalayim, the day that Jerusalem was reunified after the Six-Day War. So certainly a timely and relevant topic just to reflect on Jerusalem. Certainly there's a lot to say about Jerusalem, but I've just put together a little some snippets of biblical history, of then secular history, but really to end up with those days leading up to the Six-Day War and the reunification of Jerusalem. I know many of you have been to Jerusalem. Please God, I'm looking forward to going there in the next month, so certainly feel free to jump in. I see Ian's joined us over the last two sessions. Ian, I want to thank you for sponsoring a lantern, and I did put an acknowledgement there, but I think you were travelling, and I think you're travelling again to South Africa, right? And England on behalf of the Vision Australia Radio. Travel safely, and God bless you, continue to do your good work. And I want to thank David and Carol Jack for supporting this month's program. Much appreciated. So let us begin, as always, with some wise words of Rabbi Sachs. He actually said it on the 50th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem. So certainly it's always timely in terms of his content. The song is Jerusalem of Gold, and we'll actually conclude with that, and I'll share with you.
There's never been a love story like it in all of history, the love of this people for that city. Jerusalem is mentioned something like 660 times in Tanakh. And even though the temple was destroyed twice, and even though the city has been besieged 23 times and captured and reconquered 44 times, Jews never ceased to pray for Jerusalem, about Jerusalem, and facing Jerusalem. Somehow it was where every Jewish prayer met and ascended to heaven. And there's been nothing like it. Other cities, other faiths may hold Jerusalem holy, but they have holier places. Rome, Constantinople, Mecca, Medina. Jews only had this one city. A tiny city, but somehow it was the place, said Maimonides, from which the divine presence was never exiled. In those critical and tense weeks before the Six-Day War, I was just coming near the end of my first undergraduate year at Cambridge University. And for the 3 weeks beforehand, we all felt that something terrible was going to happen after all the troops were massed on the Egyptian and Syrian borders. And all of us, all of my generation born after the Holocaust, feared that we were about to witness a second Holocaust. All the Jewish students, vast numbers of them, turned up in the little shul in Thompson's Lane to pray. I've never seen so many people there before or since. The atmosphere was absolutely intense. And for me, it was life-changing. As soon as we saw the paratroopers, as soon as we heard the words Rabbi Biyadenu, I knew I had to go there and see it for myself. And I went there, and looking down from Har Tzofim, from Mount Scopus, down on the old city, I suddenly realized that I was standing at the very place that the Mishnah and Gemara talk about at the end of Makot, when Rabbi Akiva and 3 of his rabbinical colleagues are standing on Har Tzofim, looking down on the ruins of the temple, and the other rabbis are weeping, and Rabbi Akiva is smiling. And he says, "Why are you weeping?" And they say, "Look, the Holy of Holies, and it's ruins. A fox is walking through there. The place that only the holiest man, the high priest, could enter only on the holiest day, and now it's ruins. Of course we're weeping. Why are you not weeping?" And Rabbi Akiva said, because there were 2 prophets who gave prophecies. One, Micha, saw the city in its destruction, and another one, Zechariah, saw it rebuilt, and saw it as a place where Od yesh uzakenim uzakenot berchovot Yerushalayim, where old men and women would sit at peace in the streets of Jerusalem, and the streets would be filled with the sounds of children playing. So if I have seen the fulfillment of the prophecy of destruction, am I not convinced that there will one day come true the prophecy of rebuilding and restoration? And as I stood where Rabbi Akiva stood 2,000 years earlier, I said to myself, if he had only known how long it would take, would he still have believed? And then I suddenly realized, of course he would still have believed, because Jews would never give up hope of Jerusalem. We never allowed it to escape our minds. In any of our prayers, at our weddings, we remember Jerusalem. Every time we comfort mourners, we say, Hamakom yanachem etchem b'toch sha'avelei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. You know, Jews were a circumference whose center was Jerusalem. And I suddenly realized that people that could never forget this holy city would one day come back. And as I stood there, soon after the 6-Day War, I suddenly realized that faith brought back Jews to Jerusalem and will one day rebuild its ruins. That is the most powerful testimony of faith I know. What's special about Jerusalem today is...
Okay, so I tell you, not his words continue to resonate. It's just absolutely incredible. So let me start unpacking a little bit about the history. So we believe the place where the Dome of the Rock is now, that particular place is very significant. It's called in the Talmud the foundation stone of the world. We believe that's actually where Hashem began the creative process. We believe Adam was created there. In other words, it's the top of Mount Moriah. Abraham made the altar there for Isaac. Jacob had that very vivid dream of what we call Jacob's ladder, and that was the place where the Holy of Holies was and the temple stood. Those of us who have been on the tunnel tour that walks along the original Roman road, there's actually a place which people stop to pray there, and that particular place is directly opposite where the Holy of Holies stood. So what's interesting is that even though in the Tanakh, in these scriptures, Jerusalem's I think mentioned 660 odd times. In Torah it's actually only hinted at, as we'll soon see in the next slide. But the origin story comes from this particular episode. David, I can see you. Go for it.
Yeah, Abraham named the place God will see. As it is said, on the mountain, God will be seen, Genesis 22:14.
In other words, after the near sacrifice of his son, he called the place God will be seen, or God will be feared. And then the story continues a bit later on
After rescuing his relative Lot from captivity, Abraham was greeted by Melchizedek, the king of Jerusalem, with bread and wine. So how did Shalem and Jireh get together to become Jerusalem?
So Shalom means there was a righteous king at that time called Melchizedek, who was the king of Shalom. And we see the name in Yerushalayim as a merging of these two names. And here there's a story how God combined, Hashem combined these two names. David?
Said the Holy One, blessed be he. If I call the place Jireh, like Abraham did, the righteous Melchizedek will complain. However, if I refer to it as Shalem, the righteous Abraham will complain. Rather, I will call it Yerushalem, and the name that will contain the way it was called by both of them, Yerushalem.
So what we really see from the outset is this merging of Jerusalem, which can be interpreted as Yira, meaning fear, Shalom, complete, a place where one sees and both peace and one sees fear of God. But I think the underlying message, which we're actually going to see very clearly from Solomon's prayer, that he had a vision that Jerusalem should be a city of a shared city of peace, and that is in fact the reality. It's I don't have to tell you the significance of Jerusalem in the Christian tradition, and also there is some significance in the Muslim tradition as well. So here, one of the next story in the Torah where this place is mentioned, Michael.
Jacob's ladder. While Jacob was on his way to Haran, fleeing from his brother Esau, and he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the ground, and its top reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of Hashem were ascending and descending upon it.
So he had that famous dream. He had just taken the blessings from his brother Esau, from his father Isaac, and on the advice of his mother he fled, and he put his head down to sleep, and there he had this vision of a ladder of angels ascending and descending. And in the Jewish tradition, the metaphor of a ladder for prayer, a ladder joins heaven and earth, is something that is still continues to be elaborated on. So what's interesting is in Torah, the name Jerusalem is not mentioned, and it's only alluded to in Deuteronomy. Ian, I can see you.
Hashem chooses Jerusalem, but only to the place with the Lord your God shall choose from all your tribes to set his name there. You shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices and your tithes. Deuteronomy 12.
As we can see, the actual name of the place is not mentioned. He alludes to it, the place that I will choose. So why isn't it not mentioned in Torah? And here there are two reasons given. Yeah. Ian?
Why the name Jerusalem is not stated in Torah? Every one of the 12 tribes would desire to have this place in its borders and under its control. This would lead to divisions and discord. And secondly, if the nations had learned that this place was to be the center of the highest religious truths, they would want to occupy it.
Yeah. So ultimately, as we see here, actually, Ian, just continue the story, that King David was revealed to him that this was the place, and to show inclusion, he included everybody. Yeah, Ian, just continue.
King David, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. King David in the Hebrew year 2892 or 869 before the Common Era, established Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the Jewish nation. King David purchased the Temple Mount from Araunah the Jebusite. He collected 50 shekels of silver from each one of the tribes, totaling 600 silver shekels. Even though Jerusalem is in the territory of Benjamin and Judah, all the tribes had a part in acquiring it.
So a few points here to unpack. So what's interesting is he actually purchased the Temple Mount from Araunah the Jebusite, and it's documented. Notwithstanding that, it's the most disputed area in the world. So Ian, what other biblical purchases are there? Let me test your scriptures. Where else was there a purchase of biblical land?
Yeah, the cave of Malpelik, where the tombs are of Abraham.
Good. How much do you pay for it? Do you remember?
Was it 700 and something shekels? I think I can't remember.
400. 400. So it looks like a bit of inflation that over the 1,000 he purchased this piece of land for 600 silver shekels. The final place that was actually purchased by Jacob is Shechem, which is, I think, Nablus, which is where Joseph's tomb is. And this these three places. I mean, they just burnt down Joseph's tomb for the umpteenth time,
Yeah.
even though they're technically part of the so-called peace agreements are allowed to go there. You can only go there once a month with an armoured bus. But Shechem, Hebron, and obviously the Temple Mount, all paid for, purchased, documented, most disputed territories in Israel. What is, the other thing, and this is really quite fascinating, of two different visions of Jerusalem and really the temple. So whereas David was really focused on, and rightly so, unifying the tribes, and therefore he got everybody to chip in and pay to give them ownership, it was ultimately his son, King Solomon, that built the temple. I've got an excerpt here of what's Solomon's dedication prayer, and I really encourage all of you just to look at the full prayer because it's quite amazing. But what's striking is how he broadens the vision of the temple, not just for Israel, but really for all the nations. Janet, go for it.
Solomon's prayer of dedication, 1 Kings 8:22-61. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built.
So firstly, he sort of acknowledges that how is this actually possible, that God could reveal himself in such a small place, and he doesn't have an answer for it. He then continues with a number of passages of prayer that God should answer the prayers of the Jewish people, and here then he continues with the following. Janet, go.
As for the foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name, for they will hear of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm. When they come and pray towards this temple, then hear from heaven, your dwelling place. Do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear it, as do your own people Israel, and may know that this house I have built bears your name.
So he's really broadened the vision of the temple for all of humanity, that they should come and understand the one true God, which sort of goes beyond the particular vision of King David. Obviously, the temple was significant in Jewish history. Just to David, do you want to? I can't see anybody else.
Barry's come on.
Hi, Barry. We
Yeah,
waited patiently for you.
Yes, well, I had to go and put down an injured animal. Somebody had hit with their car.
What animal was it?
It was one of those bouncing ones, the kangaroo. They had an emergency call. Can you come and help put this thing down? It's in agony. What do you do? Anyway, that was one of the jobs I had this morning. Moving right along. The site of the three holy temples. First holy temple was completed by King Solomon, 833 BCE. The temple stood for 410 years until it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. The second holy temple was completed by Ezra, Nehemiah, and the returnees from the Babylonian exile in the year 3412-349 BCE. It was renovated extensively in the Hebrew year 3742-19 BCE by King Herod. In the year 3829-69 CE, it was destroyed by the Romans. The third and final temple is to be built with the coming of Mashiach.
So we see the temple, both temples lasted 400 years approximately, and certainly we saw a Jewish presence there in Judea for nearly 1,000 years. Michael, I have to ask you, who was the shortest man in the Bible?
Knee-high? I don't know.
Nehemiah.
Oh, nearly.
Build at the Shuhite.
That's a good
All
one.
right, so let's just give a quick snapshot of what we've said.
With the recent into history, to understand that Jerusalem has always been the capital of the Jewish people. Arguably, Jerusalem is the longest continuous capital of any people on the planet Earth. Even ancient civilizations like the Chinese have had multiple capital cities, Nanking, Beijing. But what's the history of the Jewish people's connection? The connection of the Jewish people to Jerusalem goes all the way back to the time of King David, almost 3,000 years ago. That's about 440 years after the Jewish people had initially entered the land of Israel. King David, the second king of the Jewish people after King Saul, says, "Now that we have a king from whom all future kings will come, including in Jewish tradition the Messiah, now we need a capital city." And the only logical place, of course, is going to be Jerusalem, the place where the famous binding of Isaac story took place, the spiritual and political center of the Jewish world. Almost 3,000 years ago, King David sends his general Yoab ben Suriah into the city, which until that time was occupied by the Jebusites, one of the 7 nations that resided in the land of Israel until the Jewish people entered the land under Joshua. King David conquers the city, builds his city over the original Jebusite city, which was called the city of Shalem. Once it becomes a Jewish city, the name is changed to Jerusalem. His son, Solomon, the third king, will purchase the upper part of the hill as the site where the temple will be built. And from then on, Jerusalem will be the capital city of the Jewish people through the first Commonwealth of 410 years, and the second Commonwealth following the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem 2,500 years ago. For another period of 420 years, Jerusalem will be that capital city. But even without the Jewish people being in the land of Israel, after they're exiled by the Romans almost 2,000 years ago, it will be the capital, the spiritual and political capital of the Jewish people, even without a Jewish presence there. Other peoples will come along and conquer the city. In the 7th century, the Muslims will conquer the city. And for the next 1,300 years, different Islamic dynasties, Umayyads, Abbasids, Fatimids, Ayyubids, Mamelukes, Seljuks, Ottomans, will have Jerusalem and Israel as part of their empire. But none of them will have a capital city in Jerusalem. Their capitals will be in Cairo, Baghdad, Istanbul, Damascus. In the last 3,300 years, there's only been one other group of people to have a capital in Jerusalem. It's the Latin Kingdom of the Crusaders. From 1099 to 1187, having conquered the city and slaughtered the Muslim and Jewish population, they will establish a kingdom centered in Jerusalem. But after that, it reverts to Muslim conquest. And not until 1948, when Israel is founded as a state, refounded as a state, will Jerusalem once again return to being the capital of the Jewish people. And not until 1967, after the Six-Day War, will Jerusalem, for the first time in 2,000 years, be the unified capital of the Jewish people once again. I'm Ken Spiro, and you're watching.
In case we didn't realize, there was no Palestinian state ever. There was no Palestinian government, and yeah. So, notwithstanding the temples were destroyed, Jewish people were finally exiled. Nevertheless, Jerusalem continued and continues to play a very important role in Jewish tradition. David, do you want to?
John's there, yeah.
The Kotel, the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, or the Kotel, the wall, is one of the last remaining walls of the temple destroyed by the Romans in 69 CE. It is the holiest site in Judaism and a place of pilgrimage and prayer. For most of the period following the temple's destruction, the area in front of the Western Wall was a narrow laneway, but Jews were able to pray there.
This is a really a fascinating picture of a photo actually. I just want to highlight a few things. Number one, Jews were only permitted to go there once a week to pray. You see the people sitting there. The reason why they're sitting there because the Ottomans didn't allow benches there. They actually built, as you can see, homes virtually all the way to the wall, and they just left it was just throughout the centuries until 1967, it was just this narrow laneway. And there was a garbage dump quite nearby here as well. So Jews that came, and they did come from all around the world to the wall. It was traditionally called the Wailing Wall because when they reached there, they lamented their exile and the destruction of Judea. But it was a place of pilgrimage throughout the centuries, where Jews came and prayed there under the most difficult conditions. Again, in 1967, they cleared all the homes away, and those of you who have been there who have certainly seen the photos of the plaza today, the Kotel Plaza. It's obviously been magnified, and today as well the excavations continue, where you can actually go down to the original Roman road and walk along the base of the Kotel. Okay, we'll do this. Let me just skip this one. So in Jewish ritual, the Kotel and the Jerusalem continues to be highly significant, both in ritual and in life cycle events, as we can see. So, David, you go for it.
The Jewish people never forgot about Jerusalem. If I forgot thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand, get that out of the way.
It's cunning.
Lose its cunning. Yes, I've got all synagogues are built facing Jerusalem.
So it's interesting. So in Australia, it's sort of pretty straightforward. So most of them are actually facing north, but that's China, so it's also a little bit to the west. Others are facing west. So or even a few going east if you want to fly the long way. So as long as we're not facing south, we're good, because then you're heading towards the Antarctic. In Europe, most of the synagogues actually faced east. So that's why those of us remember in Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye prays that he should have a seat along the eastern wall, because that was the most honourable wall. Also in the Amidah, just continue, David. Yeah.
One of the 19 blessings of the Amidah silent prayer, central to all Jewish prayer services, reads, "Return to your city, Jerusalem, in mercy, and establish yourself there as you promised. Blessed are you, Lord, builder of Jerusalem." At the conclusion of Pesach and Yom Kippur, we exclaim, "Lashana haba Jerusalem," next year in Jerusalem. Yeah.
So it's there in our consciousness in the daily Amidah prayer. It's there in our most significant prayer rituals at Yom Kippur, but it's also there as well in our life cycle events, both when we have a wedding, we break a glass, and the reason is not that is the last time the husband can put his foot down. But we shatter a glass to show even our most joyous event. It's tainted by the fact the temple has not been rebuilt. And also, when we traditionally comfort mourners, we have a mourning period of 7 days. The traditional greeting is, "May you be comforted together with the other mourners of Jerusalem and Zion." So very much part of Jewish prayer and Jewish ritual for over 2,000 years. There's a story of, and certainly there's a story of Napoleon that we went into a synagogue on the 9th of Av, the day the temples were destroyed. It's a fast day, and we sit on the floor, and it was in Paris, and he didn't understand what was going on. Everybody's sitting on the floor, and they're bewailing the fact that that it's a fast day, and he asked what's going on. And they said, look, it's we're commemorating the 9th day of Ab, the day that our 2 temples were destroyed. And he, feigning he was ignorant, he says, well, when was your temple destroyed? 200 years ago, 300 years ago? They said, no, at that time was 1800 years. And he was actually astounded, and you're still fasting and you're still remembering that day. And I said, yes, and at that point he said, anybody that remembers a destroyed temple for 1800 years will merit that one day they will return to Jerusalem, and please God, the temple should be rebuilt. So we're halfway there. So let's just fast forward then history, and just look at 1948 and then look at 1967 in a little bit more depth. So David, do you want to?
Sandra, you're there?
All right. 1948, Independence Day. After Israel declared independence on May 14, 1948, the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem's Old City fell on May 27 to Jordan. The Jordanians evicted all the Jews from the Old City and other neighborhoods, which were then looted by Palestinians. For the next 18 years, Jerusalem was a city divided by minefields and barbed wire.
So one of the beautiful synagogues that they destroyed was called the Churba synagogue, the destroyed synagogue. What only remained was this one arch, and about 10 years ago, a Russian oligarch actually rebuilt the Churba synagogue, and that can be seen today. History was then made in 1967 with the Six-Day War, which we'll have a clip about shortly. And David?
Emma, would you like to read? You're muted, if you're there.
What's happening?
Maybe Ian, would you like to do that again?
What about Pam? Pam, you can read.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
The 1967 Six-Day War. During the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel's army liberated Jerusalem's old city from Jordan, finding the Jewish quarter completely neglected and virtually destroyed. Since 1967, under Israeli control, members of all faiths have enjoyed full religious freedom and access to their holy sites in Jerusalem. There are over 50 churches, 33 mosques operating freely in Jerusalem today.
Yeah. So before we share this video, it's actually hosted by Rabbi Doron Perez. This was, I think he probably made this about 5 years ago. But I have to share with you the following. Doron Perez, one of his sons on October the 7th was in a tank, and he believed for many months that he was captured by Hamas. It so happened that his other son was scheduled to be married in mid-October, and he had a dilemma: should his son marry whilst his other son is potentially captive with Hamas? So he made the decision to proceed with the wedding of his daughter, albeit under difficult circumstances, and then she was married on October the 15th. Unfortunately, approximately a month ago, the IDF confirmed that they can say with all accuracy that his son was killed, but Hamas have taken his body. So he still awaits the return of his son's body. So there are a number of clips on the internet, on YouTube about this, but just for the sake of time, I just want to give a bit of background here as he tells the backstory, the divine story, the spiritual story of what happened on that day when Jerusalem was united.
There is no rational way to explain the remarkable circumstances that led to the liberation of the old city of Jerusalem in 1967. It was one of the most unexpected and inexplicable phenomena in the history of human warfare. There was no battle plan for Jerusalem whatsoever. Israeli intelligence never expected the impending confrontation to include Jordan, which had been in control of the Old City since 1948. In the south, Jamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, in contravention of international law, had closed the Straits of Tiran and sent 100,000 troops and thousands of tanks into the demilitarized Sinai Peninsula, a clear act of war. Tensions were also building on the Syrian border in the north. Israel expected a war in two fronts, north and south, but certainly not with Jordan in the east. Unbeknown to Israel, Jordan had signed an agreement with Egypt, placing the entire Jordanian army under the direct command of Egypt's chief of staff, General Riyad. It was Nasser's plan to unleash a triple-pronged attack from Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, which he believed the young state of Israel could not defend, and he would finally avenge the defeat of 1948. On the first day of the war, the Jordanian forces began shelling major cities across Israel, including heavy bombardment of Jewish West Jerusalem. Israel repeatedly implored the Jordanians to cease fire and promised they would not react. Once all diplomatic attempts failed, Israel had no choice but to defend herself and enter the unplanned fray in Jerusalem. Rabbi Yoel bin Nun, a member of the Paratrooper Reserve Brigade 55 under the command of Mota Gur, recalls the surprising change in plan. On the first day of the war, he and his fellow soldiers were en route to El Arish in Sinai when they received an urgent command to redirect to Jerusalem. The IDF now had only a few hours to familiarize themselves with the routes and topography in and around the capital. With only partial intelligence, a dire lack of East Jerusalem maps, and in complete darkness, the troops charged into battle at 2 a.m. early Tuesday morning in the second day of the war. It was then the paratroopers engaged in the fierce battles of Ammunition Hill, the American colony, and Wadi Joz, and suffered the worst day of losses in their unit's entire history, losing 100 soldiers in these battles. In comparison, the very same brigade fought for 2 weeks in the Yom Kippur War and lost 52 soldiers, half of those lost on this one blood-drenched day. However, despite the heavy price, Brigade 55, together with the Harel and Jerusalem brigades, had almost surrounded the Old City. That very night, Mota Gur had a breathtaking conversation with Rabbi Shlomo Goren, the chief rabbi of the IDF. While in the Rockefeller Museum at the northeastern tip of the Old City, awaiting orders, the rabbi said to him, "Mota, Jewish history obligates you to liberate the Old City." Mota replied that while he draws great inspiration from Jewish history, he takes his orders only from his superiors. "Mota," said Rav Goren, "Jewish history will not forgive a Jewish commander who had the opportunity to reclaim Jerusalem and did not do so." Moshe Dayan, the defense minister in the unity government, had ordered them not to capture the Old City for two reasons. Firstly, the intention of this defensive war was never to conquer the Old City and its holy sites, sacred to many religions. Secondly, he was aware of the large Jordanian military presence in the Old City, especially on the Temple Mount, with huge amounts of artillery and ammunition. Having seen the devastating losses on that one day, Dayan anticipated much greater losses in hand-to-hand street combat, especially in defense of the holy places. This would be a battle that Israel would not fight, or so he thought. What he did not realize was, in Rav Soloveitchik's famous words, that divine destiny was knocking at the door. The drama of Jewish destiny was about to unfold. That very same night, two utterly unexpected and unpredictable events occurred. The first, in a remarkable display of unity, left-wing Yigal Allon and Menachem Begin from the right came together as one to Prime Minister Levi Eshkol to intercede on behalf of Jerusalem. Now was the time to liberate the holy city. The emergency cabinet heavily debated the issue, with many concerned that the world would not tolerate a Jewish conquest of Jerusalem and that Israel should not attack. Eventually, Moshe Dayan's decision was overruled and the cabinet gave the green light. It was time to return to Jerusalem for the first time in 2,000 years, at any cost. At that very same time, another dramatic decision was being made. The commander of the Jordanian troops in the Old City, sensing the inevitable and realizing he was surrounded, requested permission to retreat over the Mount of Olives and back over the Jordan River. General Riyad gave his approval, and the Jordanians fled that very same evening. Our sages describe how Jerusalem is the only city in the world that exists on two planes, in heaven and on earth. Jerusalem on high and Jerusalem down below. Nothing happens in Jerusalem on high unless it happens concurrently in Jerusalem below. Perhaps at the very moment of both debates between the rabbi and the commander and within the cabinet in the city below, a similar debate was taking place in the heavenly cabinet. Were the Jewish people worthy of returning to Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh? Was this the moment they'd been waiting for 2,000 years? Or would they have to wait 2,000 more? Would there be more devastating loss of life in a battle on the mountain of God? Or would there be a more merciful outcome? As we know, divine mercy won the day. Am Yisrael would not have to wait any longer, and little blood would be spilt on that epic day in Jerusalem in June 1967. The hand of heaven was moving history forward. When Mota Gur positioned himself on the Mount of Olives the next morning, preparing for the battle of his life, he was astounded. There was barely a Jordanian soldier in sight. After a few minor skirmishes, and mercifully with very little loss of life, Mota Gur proclaimed the iconic words, Har Habayit B'Yadeinu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. Israel had accomplished what seemed impossible with all the political predictions and military assessments from just a few days before. The Jewish people had returned home.
אני יורד ברגע זה, אני יורד במדרגות אל הכותל. אינני אדם דתי, מעולם לא הייתי, אבל זהו הכותל, ואני נוגע באבני הכותל המערבי.
Extraordinary turn of events is another powerful reminder of the meaning of Jewish life. Our collective journey on earth cannot be separated from our heavenly odyssey. Individual and national master plans cannot be severed from the master's plan. The very existence of Israel and Jerusalem is a constant testimony to the inextricable bond between human history and divine providence, between Jewish destiny and our spiritual destination.
Yeah, powerful words. Powerful words.
Yeah.
So just to conclude, David, do you want to?
John, would you like another go?
Thus says the Lord of hosts, the day will come when old men and old women will populate the streets of Jerusalem, and the streets of the city will fill with boys and girls at play. From Zechariah. Jews became a plurality of Jerusalem's population in the early 1800s and have been a majority since 1864. Today, the population, 970,000, is with 60% Jews and 40% Palestinians. Jerusalem is Israel's largest city at nearly 50 square miles. It has become a major cultural centre with over 70 institutions teaching the arts, some 60 museums, 30 annual music festivals, an annual marathon, 26 wineries, and over 1,500 public parks and gardens. All of these are visited by some 3.5 million tourists per year.
Yeah, and, should continue to increase. So I just want to conclude, at that time there was a very famous song called Jerusalem of Gold. It's a long song. It was sung by Ofra Chazar, and unfortunately she passed away. But this was actually a potential national anthem instead of Hatikva. But let's just conclude with one stanza of this song, and then we'll turn off the recording. It was written in the aftermath of the 6-Day War.
אוויר הרים צלול כיין וריח אורנים נישא ברוח ארבעים עם כל פנים ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני
It does go on a bit longer with number stanzas, but very powerful and moving song. David, can you just